I am Julian Vance. I am 32 years old, and 3 months after my father's funeral, my own brother handed me a neatly wrapped box at a crowded, high-end steakhouse, right in the middle of my birthday dinner, just to destroy my life. While I was sitting there, trying to maintain some illusion of family unity after our devastating loss, my older brother Arthur leaned across the white tablecloth and said, "Maybe this will finally explain why you were always another man's mistake." He said it loud enough for the tables next to us to hear. My mother just sat there and covered her mouth to hide a giggle. They humiliated me in front of dozens of strangers. But there is one thing they did not know. That little plastic tube they gave me as a weapon to kick me out of my inheritance would end up exposing a 20-year extortion ring, a secret billionaire bloodline, and a lawsuit that would leave them begging on their knees. And right now, the golden boy of the Vance family is scrubbing rims at a local car wash just to survive. Before I tell you exactly how I legally dismantled my toxic family, hit that like button if you believe that justice always finds a way in the end. And do not forget to drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from tonight. Now, let us go back to the moment the trap was set. The atmosphere in that Italian restaurant was thick with the smell of roasted garlic, expensive red wine, and absolute hypocrisy. We were supposed to be celebrating my 32nd birthday. It was the first family gathering since we buried my father, Marcus Vance. You would think losing the patriarch of the family would bring a mother and her 2 sons closer together. You would be wrong. Arthur sat across from me, wearing a designer suit that probably cost more than my first car. He was 35 tall, with the kind of effortless, arrogant good looks that let him slide through life without ever facing a single consequence. Next to him sat our mother, Cynthia. She was picking at her salmon, her hair perfectly coiffed, looking more like she was attending a country club board meeting than her youngest son's birthday dinner. I was the one who ordered the wine. I was the one trying to make conversation about the real estate market, my recent promotion at the financial firm, anything to fill the dead air. They barely responded. Mother just nodded absently, her eyes constantly darting to Arthur to gauge his mood. Then dessert arrived. The waiter placed a slice of tiramisu in front of me with a single candle. Before I could even pick up my fork, Arthur slid a small, silver-wrapped box across the table. I genuinely thought it was a peace offering. For a fraction of a second, my stupid, hopeful heart thought that maybe the sheer grief of losing Dad had changed him. I peeled back the silver paper and lifted the lid. There was no watch inside. There was no gift card or meaningful memento. It was a plastic tube and a sterile cotton swab. A home DNA test kit. The clinking of silverware around us seemed to stop. The background jazz music faded out. I just stared at the bright packaging. Arthur smirked. He leaned forward, his elbows resting heavily on the table, his eyes shining with pure malice. He delivered his line about me being another man's mistake with the practiced timing of a stage actor. I looked at my mother. I expected her to gasp. I expected her to reprimand him, to tell him that this was a cruel, tasteless joke. Instead, she looked down at her lap and let out a soft, breathy laugh. She was entirely complicit. I did not yell. I did not flip the table. I grew up in a house where showing emotion was considered a weakness, and I had mastered the art of building a fortress around my reactions. I picked up the box, put it in my jacket pocket, placed a $100 bill on the table for the tip, and walked out without saying a single word. The drive home to my modest apartment was suffocating. The streetlights bled across my windshield in blurry yellow streaks. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel until my knuckles turned completely white. The silence inside my car was heavy, filled only with the rhythmic thud of my own heartbeat. I tossed the silver box onto the passenger seat. It sat there like a ticking time bomb. At first, the sting of the humiliation was blinding. But as the cold night air blasted through the vents, my financial brain kicked into gear. I analyzed data for a living. I look for patterns, anomalies, and hidden liabilities. Arthur was a lot of things. He was vain, he was cruel, and he was pathologically selfish. But above all else, Arthur was incredibly lazy. He never went out of his way for anyone. Buying a DNA test, taking the time to wrap it perfectly, orchestrating a dinner at a specific restaurant, and delivering a rehearsed speech that required effort. That required planning. Arthur did not do extra work just for a simple prank. A prank is putting salt in someone's coffee. This was not a prank. This was a calculated legal maneuver. My father's estate had not been settled yet. The reading of the will was continuously delayed. Arthur was trying to rattle me. He was trying to hand me the very tool he needed to legally disqualify me from the inheritance. He wanted me to take the test, find out I did not belong, and walk away out of pure shame before the lawyers ever got involved. I pulled into the dark parking lot of my apartment complex and turned off the engine. I picked up the box. The plastic wrapping crinkled in the quiet car. If Arthur wanted to play a game of chess, he picked the wrong opponent. He thought he was handing me a shovel to dig my own grave. He did not realize he was handing me the key to a locked vault. I opened the box, took out the sterile swab, and scraped the inside of my cheek. I was going to find out exactly what they were so desperate to hide. But the truth I was about to uncover was far darker than a simple case of infidelity. Mailing that tube the next morning felt like pulling the pin on a grenade. The processing would take weeks, and in that time, the ghosts of my childhood came rushing back, refusing to stay buried. Arthur's words echoed in my head every time I closed my eyes. The truth is, I had felt like a mistake for 32 years. I grew up in an immaculate, sprawling house in the suburbs. It was the kind of neighborhood where the lawns were perfectly manicured, the driveways were pressure-washed, and the local HOA meetings were treated like Supreme Court hearings. To the outside world, the Van Cess were the American dream personified. My father, Marcus, ran a highly successful manufacturing company. My mother hosted charity galas and Thanksgiving dinners that looked like they belonged in a lifestyle magazine. But behind those heavy mahogany doors, the hierarchy was absolute. Arthur was the son. He was loud, demanding, athletic, and possessed a reckless charm that made people instantly forgive his worst behavior. I was the shadow. I was the quiet, observant kid who was expected to occupy space without making a sound. I remember my 7th birthday with perfect, painful clarity. For months, I had begged for a rich, dark chocolate cake. I talked about it constantly. I even drew pictures of it. When the day finally arrived, the dining room was decorated, and my mother brought out a massive cake with bright white frosting. I eagerly watched her slice into it. It was yellow inside. Lemon cake. I sat there, my 7-year-old heart sinking into my stomach. I looked up at her and whispered that it was supposed to be chocolate. My mother sighed, a sound of deep annoyance, and said, "Do not be ungrateful, Julian. Arthur loves lemon. Chocolate makes him hyper. It is just cake." I ate the sour sponge cake in silence while Arthur asked for a second piece. As we grew older, the gap only widened. Arthur was a walking disaster. He snuck out, he partied, and he constantly found himself in trouble. On the morning of the ceremony, I walked downstairs feeling a rare sense of excitement. I found my mother pacing the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, tears streaming down her face. My father was violently throwing his coat on. Arthur had gone to a college frat party the night before. He got blackout drunk and wrapped his brand new Porsche, a car my father bought him just for getting accepted into a mediocre state college, around a telephone pole. He was physically fine, but he had been arrested for a DUI. I stood there in my cheap suit and told them we had to leave for the auditorium in 20 minutes. My father looked at me like I was a stranger bothering him on the street. "Your brother is in a jail cell, Julian. We have to go deal with the lawyers and post bail. Catch a ride with a friend." They walked out the door. I drove myself to my graduation in my beat-up sedan. I delivered my speech to a crowd of cheering families, looking out at the sea of faces, searching for my parents' faces in the bleachers. The seats I had reserved for them remained empty. I accepted my diploma, went home, and found my Aunt Beatrice sitting in the living room. She was my father's sister, a bitter woman who thrived on family drama. When I walked in, she didn't congratulate me. She looked at my cap and gown and rolled her eyes. "Don't be so selfish, Julian," she snapped before I even spoke. Your brother is going through a terrible trauma right now. The least you can do is not make today about you. That afternoon, I overheard my father on the phone. To keep Arthur out of prison and replace the wrecked Porsche, they were liquidating a massive chunk of assets. They drained the college fund they had set up for me. Every single penny I thought I had for my future was wiped out to cover Arthur's legal fees. I did not argue. I did not scream. Something inside me just quietly snapped, shutting off the valve of hope I had kept open for 18 years. I packed a single duffel bag, left my house keys on the kitchen counter, and walked out the door. I put myself through a grueling finance degree working night shifts. I learned about compound interest, asset management, and corporate strategy while eating canned beans in a freezing apartment. I built a career from the ground up. I bought my own real estate. I managed my own salary. I never asked them for a dime, and they never offered one. And yet, despite all the coldness, I still showed up to the holidays. I still went to the Thanksgiving dinners, sitting at the end of the table while Arthur bragged about his latest failed business venture that our father was funding. I stayed because, deep down, a pathetic part of me still wanted to be a part of a family. But sitting in my apartment now, weeks after that disastrous 32nd birthday dinner, I realized how foolish I had been. The DNA test results were taking too long. My mind was spinning. I needed a baseline. I needed to know what my father's private files said about me. Marcus Vance was a meticulous man. He kept detailed records of everything. If there was a secret about my parentage, it would be in his heavily guarded study. I knew my mother's schedule. She went to her country club luncheons every Tuesday at noon. Arthur never woke up before 1 p.m. unless he had a golf game. I took a personal day from my firm. I parked 3 blocks away from my childhood home and walked up the familiar, perfectly paved driveway. My old key still worked. The deadbolt clicked, and I slipped inside. The house smelled of expensive potpourri and lemon polish, exactly as it always had. The silence was heavy. I moved quickly down the hallway, past the giant oil portraits of Arthur at various stages of his life. There were 0 photos of me. I entered my father's study. It was a dark, intimidating room lined with leather-bound books and smelling faintly of aged cigars. His massive oak desk sat in the center. I went straight for the heavy steel filing cabinets hidden in the closet. I knew the combination from watching him years ago. Arthur's birthday. Typical. The lock clicked open. I sifted through decades of financial history, mortgages, 401k statements, insurance policies, and lawsuit settlements regarding Arthur's many indiscretions. Then, I found a thin manila folder tucked all the way in the back. It did not have a typed label like the others. It simply had the letter J written in faded black ink. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside were my birth certificate, my shot records, and my report cards. The basic administrative paperwork of a human life. But underneath it all was a small, worn Polaroid photograph. It was a picture of me as a newborn wrapped in a hospital blanket. I knew it was me because of the distinct birthmark on the back of my neck. But the man holding me was not Marcus Vance. He was a tall man with striking features, dark hair, and piercing eyes. He was wearing a sharply tailored suit, but his tie was pulled loose. He was looking down at me with an expression of such profound, overwhelming love that it actually made my chest ache. I had never seen anyone look at me like that in my entire life. I flipped the photograph over. On the back, written in my mother's unmistakable, looping handwriting, were 2 words: "Forgive me." My breath hitched. My mother had an affair. This man was my biological father. And Marcus Vance had kept this photo hidden in his safe for over 3 decades. Suddenly, the roar of a high-performance engine shattered the silence of the neighborhood. I froze. I recognized that obnoxious sound anywhere. It was Arthur's bright yellow Lamborghini pulling into the driveway. He was home early. Panic spiked in my chest. I shoved the Polaroid into my jacket pocket, hastily shoved the folder back into the cabinet, and spun the dial on the safe. I heard the heavy front door open, followed by Arthur's booming voice complaining on his cell phone. I don't care what the bank says, Victor. Tell them the inheritance money is coming. The old man is dead. I am the primary beneficiary. Just buy me some time. His footsteps were heavy on the hardwood floor, moving directly toward the hallway that led to the study. I had seconds. I slipped out the side door of the study that connected to the back patio, gently easing the latch shut just as the main door to the office swung open. I crouched behind the large brick planters in the garden, my heart hammering against my ribs, until I heard Arthur walk back toward the kitchen. I slipped over the back fence and walked the 3 blocks back to my car, the stolen photograph burning a hole in my pocket. I had the physical proof. Now I just needed a name. 2 days later, the email notification finally chimed on my phone. Your DNA results are ready. I was sitting at my desk at the financial firm. I locked my office door, opened my laptop, and clicked the link. The screen loaded a colorful pie chart, but I ignored the ethnicity estimates. I went straight to the family matches. Just as I suspected, there was 0 genetic link to the Vance family tree. But sitting right at the very top of the list was a direct parent-child match. Alexander Sterling. Shared DNA, 50%. I stared at the name. Felt heavy, significant. I opened a new tab and searched the name. The results flooded the screen. Alexander Sterling was not just some random guy. He was a notoriously private billionaire, the founder of Sterling Global Investments, a massive private equity firm. I clicked on his images. It was the same man from the Polaroid, just older. Silver hair, sharp jawline, the exact same piercing eyes that stared back at me in the mirror every morning. My biological father was a titan of industry. I started digging frantically through financial archives. I cross-referenced Sterling Global Investments with my father's manufacturing company. And then, I found the missing piece of the puzzle. An obscure financial article from 32 years ago. Vance Manufacturing saved from the brink of bankruptcy by anonymous private equity injection. The date of the cash injection was exactly 3 weeks after I was born. The reality hit me like a freight train. My mother had an affair with Alexander Sterling and got pregnant. Marcus found out. But Marcus was bankrupt. He was about to lose the house, the cars, the country club status. So a sickening transaction took place. Alexander Sterling quietly paid off all of Marcus Vance's debts to save his company. In exchange, to avoid a massive public scandal that would ruin her reputation, my mother stayed with Marcus. And Marcus agreed to raise me. I was not a son. I was a business transaction. I was the price Marcus Vance charged to keep his pride intact. He used my existence to fund his entire empire, and then he spent 32 years punishing me for it by treating me like a ghost. Suddenly, my phone buzzed on my desk. It was a text from my cousin Sam. Sam was the only person in the family who ever acted somewhat decent toward me. Hey man, heard about the horrible dinner. Arthur is completely out of line. How are you holding up? Are you planning to fight him for the estate? You know I've got your back. I started to type a thank you message, but my instincts flared. I stopped. In corporate finance, you learn to trust the data, not the words. I walked out of my office and went down the hall to my colleague and closest friend, Chloe. She was an absolute wizard with tech and data forensics. Chloe, I need a favor. Completely off the books. I showed her the text from Sam. Can you see if there is any parallel communication happening here? Chloe cracked her knuckles, hooked her phone up to her terminal, and ran a quick diagnostic through an app she used to trace social media linkages and shared server pings. 10 minutes later, she pulled up a screen that made my blood run cold. Sam was not checking on me. Sam was a mole. Chloe managed to pull metadata showing that within 30 seconds of sending me that text, Sam was actively engaged in an encrypted chat with Arthur's primary device. He hasn't replied yet. Sam had messaged Arthur. I'll keep probing to see if he's lawyering up. I looked at the screen, the neon lights of the office reflecting in my eyes. The betrayal was absolute. There was no family left to salvage. There was only a battlefield. I pulled out my phone, blocked Sam's number, and took a deep breath. It was time to stop playing the victim. It was time to burn their pristine world to the ground. Armed with the DNA results, the printed financial archives, and the stolen Polaroid, I did not wait for the lawyers to summon me. I drove straight back to the Vance estate. It was mid-afternoon. The neighborhood was quiet, the sprinklers hissing rhythmically over the manicured lawns. I walked through the front door without knocking. I found my mother in her prized glass greenhouse in the backyard, carefully pruning a rare, expensive orchid. She looked up, startled by my sudden appearance. "Julian, what are you doing here in the middle of the workday?" she asked, wiping dirt from her gardening gloves. She looked at me with that same mild irritation she always carried. I did not exchange pleasantries. I walked right up to the potting table and slammed the printed DNA results and the Polaroid photograph down onto the glass surface. "Alexander Sterling," I said, my voice dangerously calm. My mother's face drained of color so fast I thought she was going to faint. She dropped the pruning shears. They clattered loudly against the stone floor. She stared at the photograph of the billionaire holding me, her hands beginning to shake violently. Where did you get this?" she stammered, backing away until she hit the glass wall of the greenhouse. "Marcus's safe," I replied, stepping closer. He knew the whole time. He took Sterling's money to save his precious company. And you let him treat me like a stray dog for 32 years to protect your country club reputation." Tears immediately spilled over her cheeks. She covered her face with her dirt-stained hands, sobbing uncontrollably. "I was terrified, Julian. You don't understand what it was like. Marcus was a proud man. He would have thrown me out on the street. I had to protect the family." "You protected yourself," I snapped. "You sold me to a man who hated me. But that isn't even the worst part, is it?" I leaned forward, placing both hands on the table. "Arthur gave me a DNA test at my birthday dinner. He made a joke about me being another man's mistake. It wasn't a lucky guess. He knew." "How long has Arthur known?" My mother let out a wretched, choking sound. She slid down the glass wall, collapsing onto a small wooden stool. "Since he was 16, she whispered. The air in the greenhouse suddenly felt suffocatingly hot. 16. I repeated, doing the math in my head. That was nearly 20 years ago. "He found a letter in my vanity," she sobbed, unable to look me in the eye. "A letter Alexander wrote me after you were born. Arthur confronted me. He said if I didn't give him what he wanted, he would march into his father's office and show him the letter. He said he would destroy the family and tell everyone." My mind reeled as the horrific puzzle pieces clicked into place. "He blackmailed you." She nodded pathetically. "He demanded a new car. Then he demanded an unlimited credit card. Every time he crashed a car, every time he racked up gambling debts, he held that letter over my head. He drained your college fund because he told me to convince Marcus it was necessary, or else he would spill the secret. I paid him to stay quiet. I paid him for 20 years. I felt physically sick. Arthur had not just been a spoiled brat. He had been running an extortion ring inside his own house. He had terrorized our mother and systematically stolen millions of dollars in assets, all while holding my illegitimate existence hostage." "And Marcus never knew about the blackmail?" I asked. "No," she cried. "Marcus never spoke of your true parentage to me, ever. I thought Marcus was completely in the dark about the letter. I lived in pure terror every single day." Bravo! Quite the dramatic confession. I turned around. Arthur was standing in the doorway of the greenhouse. He was wearing silk loungewear, holding a crystal glass of bourbon, looking completely unbothered by the fact that his 20-year crime ring had just been exposed. "You've been listening," I said, my fists clenching at my sides. "Hard not to, with all the crying," Arthur sneered, taking a slow sip of his drink. He walked into the greenhouse, casually stepping over the shears Mother had dropped. "You know, Julian, you really shouldn't be so angry. I just leveraged an asset. Mom had a secret, I had silence. It was a simple business transaction. Supply and demand." "You are a monster," I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register. You ruined her life, and you took everything from me. Oh, stop whining. Arthur rolled his eyes. You were never supposed to be here anyway. You are a biological fraud. And now that the old man is dead, the bank is cut off. Mom doesn't have a husband to be scared of anymore, which means my leverage is gone. So, it is time to clean house. He pointed a finger at me, the arrogance rolling off him in waves. I gave you that DNA test so you would have the proof in your own hands. The will reading is on Friday. The document explicitly leaves the estate to Marcus Vance's biological children, which means you get absolutely nothing. Do yourself a favor, Julian. Save the lawyer fees, don't show up on Friday, and walk away quietly. Or I will humiliate you in front of the entire legal team. I looked at my brother. I looked at the utter lack of empathy, the sociopathic greed behind his eyes. He thought he held all the cards. He thought I was still the quiet, obedient teenager who would just pack a duffel bag and walk away into the night. I will see you on Friday, Arthur, I said evenly. I picked up my documents, turned my back on both of them, and walked out of the greenhouse. I did not drive back to the office. I drove straight downtown to the financial district. I needed a lawyer, but I was not going to use Mr. Carmichael, the ancient, conservative family attorney who handled the Vance estate. I needed a shark. I walked into the sleek, high-rise offices of Thorne and Associates. I asked to see Evelyn Thorne. She was a legend in the city. A ruthless, brilliant estate litigator known for tearing apart complex trusts and destroying fraudulent heirs. I waited in the glass-walled conference room for 20 minutes before she walked in. Miss Thorne was in her late 50s, wearing a sharp charcoal suit, carrying an iPad, and possessing an aura of absolute authority. Mr. Vance, she said, not bothering to smile as she sat across from me. Your family's firm is quite well known. Why are you sitting in my office instead of Mr. Carmichael's? I slid the DNA results, the financial records of the Sterling buyout, and a handwritten timeline of Arthur's 20-year extortion scheme across the polished mahogany table. Because my brother intends to use my biological status to remove me from my father's will this Friday, I said clearly, and I have reason to believe he has committed decades of financial extortion and elder abuse. I don't want to just defend my claim, Miss Thorne. I want to utterly destroy him. Evelyn Thorne put on her reading glasses. She spent 10 solid minutes reading through the documents in total silence. I watched her eyes track back and forth. Finally, she took off her glasses, folded her hands on the table, and looked at me. A very small, very dangerous smile crept onto her face. I charge $1,000 an hour, Mr. Vance, she said, and I require a $50,000 retainer up front. I pulled out my checkbook, signed my name, and pushed it across the table. Done. Excellent, she said, sliding the check into a folder. Now, tell me absolutely everything. For the next 3 hours, we built an impenetrable fortress of legal strategy. We pulled property records, we mapped out the flow of money from my parents' joint accounts to Arthur's offshore gambling sites, and we prepared for every possible attack vector Arthur might try at the reading. As I was leaving her office, feeling a dark sense of anticipation, my cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. Hello, I answered as I stepped into the elevator. Julian, it's Victor. The voice was gruff, grating. Victor was a sleazy real estate developer who ran in Arthur's gambling circles. He was the guy Arthur was yelling at on the phone days earlier. I don't have anything to say to you, Victor, I replied. You should listen, kid, Victor chuckled, though there was no humor in it. Your brother owes some very bad people a lot of money. 7 figures. He promised that when the old man's will drops on Friday, he is going to make us whole. I hear you're causing friction. Don't cause friction, Julian. Let Arthur have his payout, or things are going to get very uncomfortable for you. Understand? He hung up before I could respond. I stood in the descending elevator, staring at my reflection in the polished steel doors. Arthur was not just greedy, he was desperate. He had leveraged his future inheritance to cover massive mob debts. If he did not get the estate on Friday, his life was effectively over. A younger version of me would have been terrified. A younger version of me would have backed down to keep the peace. But I was no longer that frightened boy eating lemon cake in the corner. I had survived entirely on my own, building my wealth brick by brick, while Arthur played pretend with other people's money. I stepped out of the elevator into the bustling city street. The storm was coming, and for the first time in my life, I was not looking for shelter. I was the storm. The 48 hours leading up to the will reading were an exercise in cold, calculated precision. I did not sleep much. I spent my nights in my apartment, reviewing every financial document, every trust provision, and every piece of corporate law Evelyn Thorne had sent over to my secure server. I needed to understand the exact mechanics of how Marcus Vance's empire was structured. My father was a man who measured affection in decimal points and loyalty in profit margins. If he had truly intended to leave me with nothing, he would have done it immaculately. But the fact that he kept my biological father's photo in a locked safe for 3 decades meant something. It was a variable I could not fully calculate. On Thursday evening, the night before the showdown, I sat on my balcony overlooking the city skyline. The neon lights flickered below, a chaotic contrast to the intense focus in my mind. My phone buzzed on the glass table. Another text from Cynthia, my mother. "Julian, please, don't come tomorrow. Arthur is furious. He's talking to his own lawyers. He says if you show up, he will drag the Sterling scandal into the public eye. He will ruin my reputation. Please, for my sake, just let him have it." I stared at the glowing screen. For my sake. Even now, after everything had been exposed, after she admitted she had been extorted for 20 years, her primary concern was her country club status. She was still asking me to jump on a grenade to save Arthur. I picked up the phone, blocked her number, and set it face down. I was done negotiating with terrorists, and I was done protecting cowards. Friday morning arrived crisp and bright. I dressed meticulously. I put on a bespoke charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, and a dark, understated tie. I looked like a man who managed billions, which was entirely accurate. I strapped on my watch, took a deep breath, and walked out the door. The offices of Carmichael and Sons were located in a historic, ivy-covered brick building on the prestigious side of town. The interior was all dark wood paneling, Persian rugs, and the stifling scent of old money and impending doom. I arrived precisely 10 minutes early. My lawyer, Evelyn Thorne, was already waiting in the lobby. She looked magnificent, a shark swimming in a tank full of guppies. She gave me a single, sharp nod. "Are we ready, Mr. Vance?" she asked. "More than ready, Miss Thorne." We were escorted into a massive boardroom dominated by a long mahogany table. Mr. Carmichael, the elderly, trembling family lawyer, sat at the head, shuffling a thick stack of heavily sealed documents. A few minutes later, the heavy double doors swung open, and the circus arrived. Arthur walked in first, radiating an aggressive, toxic confidence. He was flanked by 2 slick-looking attorneys in cheap, flashy suits. Behind him trailed our mother, looking pale, exhausted, and heavily medicated. She wore dark sunglasses indoors and kept her head bowed. Arthur stopped dead in his tracks when he saw me sitting calmly at the table. His smirk vanished for a fraction of a second, replaced by a flash of genuine anger, before he plastered it back on. "I told you not to come, Julian," Arthur sneered, pulling out a chair at the opposite end of the table. He threw his leather briefcase onto the mahogany with a loud smack. "You are just wasting billable hours. But I suppose you always did like playing pretend." He glanced at Evelyn Thorne, clearly not recognizing her, assuming she was some low-level associate I had scraped together. "And you brought a +1. Cute." Evelyn did not even blink. She merely adjusted her legal pad and stared at Arthur with the dead, flat eyes of an apex predator looking at its next meal. "Let us maintain decorum, please," Mr. Carmichael croaked, tapping a silver pen against his files. "This is a solemn occasion. We are here to execute the final wishes of Mr. Marcus Vance. I will ask that all parties refrain from interruptions until the reading is complete." Arthur leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms behind his head, the picture of an arrogant king waiting for his crown. "Get on with it, Carmichael. Read the numbers." The old lawyer cleared his throat and broke the wax seal on the primary folder. He began with the standard legal boilerplate, the revocation of prior wills, the payment of outstanding debts, the funeral expenses. The air in the room was thick with tension. I kept my eyes locked on the grain of the wood table, my breathing slow and measured. "To my wife, Cynthia Vance," Mr. Carmichael read, his voice wavering slightly. "I leave the primary residence and a monthly stipend of $10,000 to be drawn from the family trust, provided she does not attempt to liquidate the property." My mother let out a small, shaky exhale. It was a generous stipend, but she did not own the cash outright. Marcus had put her on an allowance from beyond the grave. He knew she could not manage money. Arthur rolled his eyes. Yeah, the house is safe. Move on to the corporate assets. Move on to the primary beneficiary." Mr. Carmichael paused. He looked over the rim of his reading glasses, his gaze sweeping across the room, lingering briefly on me, and then settling heavily on Arthur. "To my eldest son, Arthur Vance," the lawyer read carefully. Arthur sat up straight, a greedy, hungry light illuminating his eyes. He leaned forward, literally rubbing his hands together. Mr. Carmichael continued, "I leave the sum of $50,000. The room went dead silent. Arthur blinked. Once, twice. The silence stretched so tight it felt like the walls were going to crack. "I'm sorry." Arthur let out a sharp, nervous laugh. "You misread that. You missed a few zeros, old man. You mean 50 million in corporate shares, right?" "I did not misread the document, Arthur," Mr. Carmichael said firmly. $50,000, as a one-time, lump sum payment. Arthur's face turned a violent shade of purple. He slammed both hands onto the table, half standing out of his chair. "That is impossible. I am the eldest biological son. The company is worth 9 figures. Where is the rest of it? Who gets the company?" Mr. Carmichael did not flinch. He turned the page. "The entirety of my remaining estate, including full controlling shares of Vance Manufacturing, the commercial real estate portfolio, and all liquid investment accounts, is hereby bequeathed to Julian Vance." My mother gasped aloud. Arthur froze, his mouth hanging open, the blood draining completely from his face. I did not move a muscle. I just sat there, the weight of a billion-dollar empire settling silently onto my shoulders. Arthur exploded. He kicked his chair back so violently it crashed to the floor. "No, absolutely not. This is a fraud." He frantically unzipped his briefcase and ripped out the printed copy of my DNA test. He slammed it down right in front of Mr. Carmichael. "He is not a Vance," Arthur screamed, spit flying from his lips. "Look at it. I have the DNA proof. My mother is a whore who slept with another man. Julian is a bastard. The previous draft of the will stated the assets go to the biological children. He legally cannot inherit." Arthur turned his wild, desperate eyes toward me. "You thought you could steal my life? I'm going to tie this up in probate court for the next 10 years. You will drown in legal fees before you ever see a single dime of my money." I finally looked up. I looked past Arthur's screaming face, past my mother crying into her hands, and locked eyes with my lawyer. Evelyn Thorne smoothly stood up from her chair. She buttoned her suit jacket, picked up a thick, black binder from the table, and looked directly at Arthur's cheap attorneys, who were already looking panicked. "Mr. Vance," Evelyn said, her voice cutting through the room like a scalpel, "before you threaten my client with a lawsuit, perhaps you should let Mr. Carmichael read the addendum your father left behind. Because what you don't realize is that your father wasn't blind. He was building a cage, and you just walked right into it." The mahogany boardroom of Carmichael and Sons felt completely devoid of oxygen. Arthur stood frozen at the end of the long table, his face a grotesque mask of rage and confusion. His 2 cheap attorneys were already frantically whispering to each other, furiously flipping through the legal packets in front of them, looking for a loophole that simply did not exist. My lawyer, Evelyn Thorne, remained standing. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her presence alone was enough to command the entire room, radiating the kind of lethal authority that only comes from decades of destroying fraudulent heirs and dismantling hostile corporate takeovers. Mr. Carmichael adjusted his reading glasses. His trembling hands smoothed out a heavy, cream-colored document bearing my father's personal embossed seal. "If you will please sit down, Arthur," Mr. Carmichael said, his voice surprisingly firm for a man of his advanced age. "Your father anticipated this exact outburst. He attached a personal addendum to the final draft of the will. He insisted it be read aloud, in its entirety, the moment you inevitably challenged the inheritance." Arthur slowly sank back into his chair, his eyes darting frantically between me, Evelyn, and the old lawyer. "Read it," he spat. "Read the senile ramblings. It will only help my lawsuit when I prove he was mentally incompetent." Mr. Carmichael ignored the threat. He looked down at the heavy paper and began to read the final words of Marcus Vance. "To my family," the letter began. "If this addendum is being read, it means the truth about Julian's parentage has finally been dragged into the light. I have known since Julian was an infant that he is not my biological child. I accepted the arrangement to save my manufacturing company from bankruptcy. I traded my pride for capital. But over the last 3 decades, I observed something I did not expect. I watched a young boy grow up in my house with zero encouragement, zero financial help, and absolute coldness from the people who should have protected him. I watched Julian build a life of honor, securing a massive salary and real estate investments entirely on his own merit. I watched him work harder than anyone I have ever employed in my 50 years of business. I felt a sudden, sharp tightness in my throat. I stared at the grain of the wood table, my vision blurring just slightly. For 32 years, I thought I was invisible to him. I thought I was nothing more than a stain on his immaculate carpet. He had seen me. He had been watching the entire time. Mr. Carmichael continued reading, his voice gaining strength. "Conversely, I watched my biological son, Arthur, grow into a man who understands nothing but greed, manipulation, and entitlement. Arthur, you believe that blood makes a successor. You are wrong. Character makes a successor. Integrity makes a leader. I was not a good father to Julian. I was distant and I was ashamed of the circumstances of his birth. But as I look at the empire I built, I refuse to hand it over to a man who will burn it to the ground to fuel his own vices. I choose Julian. I legally bypass any standard biological clauses contained in prior drafts. Julian Vance is my sole executive heir." The silence in the room was absolute, pressed against my eardrums. My mother, Cynthia, let out a quiet, shattered sob, her head buried in her hands. Arthur looked like he had been struck by lightning. His jaw worked silently for a moment before the sheer force of his denial violently kicked in. "No," Arthur hissed, shaking his head. "No, this is a forgery. This is insane. He was out of his mind. I am the real son. I am the one who carries his actual bloodline. You cannot just hand a 9-figure corporate portfolio to a bastard because of some twisted sense of guilt. I am contesting this will right now. I will drag this through probate court for the next 10 years. You won't see a dime, Julian. I will prove he was legally unfit to sign that document." He looked at our mother. "Mom, tell them he was sick. Tell them he was losing his memory. We will get medical records. We will file a lawsuit today." My mother did not look up. She just continued to weep silently into her palms, completely broken by the reality of her own choices. This was the moment. This was the exact scenario we had prepared for. Evelyn Thorne stepped out from behind her chair and walked slowly toward the center of the room. She placed the thick, black binder she had been holding directly onto the table. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. "You are not going to file a lawsuit, Arthur?" Evelyn said, her voice perfectly level, carrying the sharp chill of a winter breeze. "You are not going to contest this will, and you are certainly not going to drag my client into a prolonged legal battle." Arthur scoffed, leaning back and crossing his arms. "And who the hell are you to tell me what I am going to do? I have 2 lawyers right here. We are filing the paperwork before the sun goes down." Evelyn offered a terrifyingly polite smile. "My name is Evelyn Thorne. I am the senior litigator representing Julian Vance. And before you threaten my client with a decade of litigation, you need to understand exactly what is contained within this binder. 2 years ago, shortly after his first cardiac event, your father hired an elite private investigator. He suspected that significant sums of money were leaking from his accounts, far beyond your mother's usual country club expenses. He initially thought it might be a banking error. He even audited Julian's accounts just to be safe. But the investigator quickly ruled Julian out. Julian's finances were immaculate. Evelyn flipped the binder open. The investigator then turned his full attention to you, Arthur. And what he found was a 20-year pattern of systemic financial abuse, extortion, and fraud. Arthur's arrogant posture instantly collapsed. His arms uncrossed. He grabbed the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. You don't know what you are talking about. That is privileged family business." "Fraud is not family business, Mr. Vance. It is a felony," Evelyn countered seamlessly. She pulled out a stack of high-resolution photographs and bank transcripts, sliding them down the polished mahogany toward Arthur's lawyers. The 2 men in cheap suits leaned in, their eyes widening as they scanned the documents. "Let us review the highlights, shall we?" Evelyn continued, her tone conversational but lethal. 18 months ago, you met with a shady estate attorney, not Mr. Carmichael. We have the audio transcripts of that meeting. You were explicitly asking for legal strategies to have your father declared mentally incompetent so you could seize power of attorney and liquidate his assets. You were planning a hostile takeover of your own father's life. My mother gasped, finally looking up from her hands. Her eyes were wide with horror. "Arthur? You tried to have him committed." Arthur stammered, his eyes darting toward the door. I was just exploring options. He was old. He was making bad business deals." "He was completely lucid," Evelyn snapped back. "And he heard every single word you said on those tapes. But that is merely the beginning. We also have a comprehensive record of the unauthorized withdrawals you forced your mother to make from their joint accounts. Over $2 million systematically drained over the last 5 years to cover your online gambling debts, your failed business ventures, and the settlement from your recent very messy divorce. You leveraged a dark family secret to bleed your parents dry." Arthur was sweating now. Actual beads of perspiration were forming on his forehead. He looked at his lawyers for help, but they were furiously reading the transcripts, mentally calculating the absolute disaster they had just stepped into. Evelyn was not finished. She was a master of the kill shot, and she was saving the best for last. "The inheritance was never yours, Arthur," Evelyn said quietly, stepping right up to the edge of the table, towering over him. "You played a game of chess with a man who was 3 steps ahead of you. You thought you were so clever, handing Julian a DNA test to shame him. You did not realize that your father had already documented every single one of your crimes. This binder is a loaded weapon, and my client's finger is resting directly on the trigger." The atmosphere in the room had shifted from tense to catastrophic. Arthur was breathing heavily, his chest heaving under his expensive suit. He looked like a trapped animal looking for a window to smash through. He pointed a trembling finger at Evelyn. "You can't prove any of that," Arthur shouted, though his voice lacked its usual booming confidence. "Bank transfers between family members are not extortion. They were gifts. My mother gave me that money willingly. It is not a crime to receive a financial gift from your own parents." I finally spoke. My voice was calm, deep, and completely devoid of the fear I used to feel in his presence. "They were not gifts, Arthur. They were ransom payments." Arthur glared at me. "Shut up, Julian. You are a bastard who manipulated a dying man. You think a binder full of bank statements is going to scare me away from $50 million. Evelyn Thorne reached into the pocket of her tailored jacket. She pulled out a small, sleek digital audio recorder and placed it gently onto the table. We anticipated you would claim the funds were gifts, Evelyn said, which is why the private investigator went a step further. He legally obtained a wiretap on your known associates, specifically a man named Victor, a known illicit loan shark who operates out of the financial district. When Evelyn said the name Victor, all the remaining blood completely vanished from Arthur's face. He looked like a corpse. Evelyn pressed the play button. The audio was slightly grainy, carrying the unmistakable static of a recorded phone call, but the voices were crystal clear. I don't care what the bank says, Victor. Tell them the money is coming. It was Arthur's voice, the exact same conversation I had overheard when I was hiding in the garden outside my father's study weeks ago. You owe us 7 figures, Arthur. The bosses are losing patience. We are going to start breaking things. Victor's voice growled through the small speaker. Listen to me. Arthur's recorded voice sounded frantic, unhinged. The old man is going to kick the bucket any day now. Once he is in the ground, I am cashing out the commercial real estate. I am taking everything. I already have a plan to put my mother in a cheap care facility, and I'll take control of her stipend. Julian won't get a single dime. Just give me until the will is read. Evelyn clicked the recorder off. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. My mother stared at Arthur. For the first time in 35 years, she was not looking at her golden child. She was looking at a predator. The realization that her favorite son, the boy she had protected and funded and lied for, was actively planning to throw her into a cheap nursing home to steal her survival money shattered the last remaining illusions she held. You were going to put me in a home? She whispered, her voice cracking with raw devastation. After everything I sacrificed for you? After I kept your secret? After I gave you every dollar I had? Arthur swallowed hard. He could not look at her. Mom, I was just stalling. I was just telling the guy what he wanted to hear to get him off my back. I would never actually do that. You are a liar, she sobbed, turning her face away from him in pure disgust. Mr. Carmichael cleared his throat, breaking the tension. Now, regarding the lawsuit you threatened to file earlier, Arthur, I strongly advise you to listen carefully to the final clause of your father's will. Arthur looked at the old lawyer, his eyes wide and completely hollowed out. The will contains a strict, ironclad no-contest clause, Mr. Carmichael read. It explicitly states that if any beneficiary challenges the validity of this document, disputes the distribution of assets, or initiates litigation against the primary heir, they automatically forfeit their entire inheritance. I only get $50,000 anyway, Arthur yelled desperately. What do I care about forfeiting that? I owe Victor $2 million. $50,000 does nothing for me. I have to fight this. If you contest, Evelyn interjected smoothly, stepping back to my side. You do indeed get 0, but more importantly, given the overwhelming evidence of fraud, extortion, and elder abuse contained in this binder, the estate would be well within its legal rights to press criminal charges. Evelyn listed the charges off on her manicured fingers. Grand theft, extortion, wire fraud, elder abuse. My team has already drafted the police reports. Mr. Carmichael has confirmed that you legally owe the Vance estate roughly $2.5 million in undocumented loans you never paid back. Arthur froze. What? If you accept the will as it is written, Evelyn continued, her voice echoing the finality of a judge delivering a sentence. My client is willing to forgive the outstanding debt. You take your $50,000, you sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement, you sign a waiver of contest, and you walk out of this room a free man, albeit a poor one. If you fight us, Julian effectively owns your debt. He will call it in immediately. We will hand this binder over to the district attorney by 3 o'clock this afternoon. You will not only be broke, Arthur. You will be sitting in a federal prison cell. Arthur looked at his 2 lawyers. The men were already packing their briefcases. They wanted absolutely nothing to do with a criminal extortion case. One of them leaned over and whispered in Arthur's ear, "Sign the waiver, man. We can't defend this. You're completely exposed." Arthur looked at me. His eyes were wild, desperate, and filled with tears. He was looking for a trace of the little brother he used to bully. He was looking for the weak, eager-to-please kid who just wanted a slice of chocolate cake. He didn't find him. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the heavy mahogany table. I looked him dead in the eyes, ensuring he felt the full weight of my absolute indifference. "You tried to erase me, Arthur?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet it commanded the entire room. "You gave me that DNA test to prove I did not belong. You tried to steal my history and my dignity. But all you did was hand me the exact tool I needed to realize I am vastly superior to you in every conceivable way. You are not a king. You are a parasite." Arthur's face crumpled. The arrogance, the cruelty, the decades of entitlement completely vanished, leaving behind a pathetic, terrified shell of a man. Tears streamed down his face, ruining his perfectly groomed appearance. "Julian, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "I'm your brother. We grew up together. You know the people I owe money to. They are dangerous. If I walk out of here with 50 grand, Victor will kill me. Please, Julian. You have hundreds of millions now. Just give me enough to clear my debts. Please." I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no guilt. Only the cold, clean closure of a wound that had been bleeding for 32 years. "I am an only child, Arthur," I said coldly. I looked at Mr. Carmichael. "Does he need to sign something to accept his final payout?" "Yes," Mr. Carmichael said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the table. "He needs to sign the waiver of contest and the debt forgiveness agreement." "Sign it," I commanded. Arthur looked at the paper. It was his death warrant in the social and financial circles he worshipped. It meant poverty. It meant working a minimum wage job for the rest of his life while hiding from loan sharks. But the alternative was a prison sentence. His hand shook so violently, he could barely hold the silver pen Mr. Carmichael offered him. He scratched his signature onto the bottom line. He threw the pen down onto the table. "There," Arthur spat, his voice trembling with venom and defeat. "Are you happy now? You took everything." "I took nothing," I replied. "I just stopped letting you steal." Arthur stood up, grabbed his briefcase, and walked heavily toward the heavy wooden doors. He did not look back. He walked out of the room, out of the firm, and out of my life forever. The heavy doors clicked shut behind Arthur, and the vacuum he left behind was immediately filled with the profound, exhausting silence of survival. The air in the boardroom suddenly seemed lighter, easier to breathe. The storm had passed, and the wreckage was laid bare. My mother was still sitting at the table, staring vacantly at the empty leather chair where Arthur had just signed away his life. She looked incredibly frail, as if the last hour had aged her 20 years. Her perfect hair was slightly disheveled, her makeup ruined by tears. Mr. Carmichael gathered his papers with quiet efficiency. "Julian, there are several dozen corporate documents for you to sign regarding the transfer of executive power for Vance Manufacturing, as well as the commercial real estate deeds. Miss Thorne has the finalized trusts ready for your review." "Thank you, Mr. Carmichael," I said, unbuttoning my suit jacket and taking a deep breath. For the next hour, I signed my name over and over again. I felt the immense weight of the responsibility settling into my bones. I now controlled a manufacturing empire, a massive investment portfolio, and thousands of employee salaries. It was overwhelming, but I felt entirely prepared. I had been managing my own life, my own career, and my own real estate investments on a shoestring budget for a decade. Managing abundance would be a different challenge, but I was a man built for pressure. When the lawyers were finally done, they tactfully stepped out of the boardroom to give us a moment. It was just me and my mother. She turned to me slowly. Her eyes were red, swollen, and filled with a desperate, fearful kind of hope. "Julian," she said, her voice weak and trembling. I don't know what to say. I am so sorry. I was so incredibly scared. I let him hurt you. I let your father ignore you. I thought I was holding the family together." "You weren't protecting the family, Mother?" I said gently, but without any warmth. You were protecting your secret. You were protecting your status at the country club. You sacrificed my childhood so you wouldn't have to face the consequences of your own affair. She choked on a sob, nodding her head repeatedly. I know I was a coward. Can you ever forgive me? I looked at the woman who had brought me into the world but had never once been a mother to me. She had fed me and clothed me, but she had starved me of the one thing a child actually needs: affection. Could I forgive her? Forgive? You can stay there, I said. I am not going to kick you out. I am not Arthur. I am not going to throw you into a cheap care facility and steal your dignity. She let out a massive, shuddering breath of relief. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Julian. But there are strict rules, I continued, raising a hand to stop her gratitude. Arthur is permanently banned from the property. He is not allowed to live there. He is not allowed to come over for dinner. He is not allowed to harass you for cash in the driveway. Her eyes widened. Julian, he is my son. And he is a dangerous addict who planned to destroy you. I reminded her sharply. If he shows up, you will call security, and they will call the police. Furthermore, if I find out that you are funneling any portion of your $10,000 monthly stipend to pay Arthur's gambling debts or loan sharks, I will legally sever the trust and cut off your allowance entirely. Do you understand me? That is so harsh, she whispered, fresh tears pooling in her eyes. It is a boundary, I corrected her. You have an addiction, Mother. Your addiction is Arthur. You have never been able to say no to him. So, I am stepping in and saying no for you. I am setting the boundary because you lack the spine to do it yourself. She dropped her head, staring at the polished wood. I understand. I will ensure the property taxes are paid. I will ensure the house staff receives their salary. You will be safe, and you will be comfortable, I said, standing up and collecting my briefcase. But we are not going to pretend to be best friends. I am not coming over for Sunday roasts to play happy family. I need space and I need time. I walked toward the door. I felt a profound sense of closure. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't resorted to violence. I hadn't ruined Arthur's life out of petty spite. He had built his own gallows. I had simply established the unshakable law of the land. As I walked out of the historic brick building and into the bright afternoon sun, I felt the phantom weight of the past 32 years finally lift from my shoulders. The war was officially over, but my journey to find my true history was just beginning. 6 months later, the dust had fully settled on the Vance empire. I had taken full control of the manufacturing company, restructured the executive board, and stabilized the commercial real estate portfolio. My salary and assets were secure, but more importantly, my mind was quiet. I had one final meeting to attend. It wasn't in a sterile corporate boardroom. It was at a small, private estate on the wealthy outskirts of the city. After the news of my massive inheritance hit the elite legal circles, I received a carefully worded, handwritten letter. It wasn't from a business rival or a long-lost cousin looking for a handout. It was from Eleanor Sterling, the older sister of Alexander Sterling, the billionaire who was my biological father. Alexander had passed away quietly from pancreatic cancer 3 years prior. I had spent my whole life wondering about my father, only to discover him after he was already gone. But Eleanor invited me to her home. She opened the wooden box. Inside were stacks of manila envelopes, a heavy silver mechanical watch, and a thick, leather-bound journal. He hired people to update him on your progress. Eleanor smiled, tears shimmering in her eyes. He knew when you learned to ride a bike. He knew you were valedictorian of your high school. He had an entire scrapbook of your achievements. I opened the journal to the very first page. It was written in bold, elegant handwriting. My dearest Julian, if you are reading this, it means you finally know the truth. I am profoundly sorry I could not be the one to teach you how to throw a baseball or cheer for you in the bleachers at your graduation. I made an impossible choice to keep you safe from a public scandal that would have destroyed your childhood. But please know this. I watched you grow into a magnificent man. You are strong. You are honorable. You are kind. You were never a mistake to me, Julian. You were the single greatest thing I ever helped create. Protect your gentle heart. Love, your father, Alexander. I sat in that sun-drenched room and wept. I did not hide it. I cried for the years I spent feeling broken, feeling like an unwanted. Eleanor also informed me that Alexander had left a massive, secret trust fund exclusively in my name. I didn't need the money. I already controlled the Vance empire. So I decided to put it to better use. I stepped down from the day-to-day operations of the manufacturing firm, hiring a brilliant CEO to run it in my stead. I bought a beautiful, rustic timber frame cottage up in the mountains, surrounded by acres of quiet pine forests and a crystal-clear lake. I needed nature. I needed peace. Using Alexander's trust and the profits from the Vance estate, I founded the Sterling Vance Foundation. We provide full-ride college funds, housing assistance, and legal advocacy for teenagers aging out of the foster care system. Kids who grew up feeling invisible, kids who were told they were mistakes. I spend my days reviewing scholarship applications, managing the charity's real estate holdings, and watching broken kids realize their true potential. I occasionally text my mother. Short, polite updates. She adheres strictly to the boundaries. We are slowly, very carefully, building something resembling respect. As for Arthur, word travels fast in our old city. After Victor's associates caught up to him, Arthur had to liquidate everything he owned. He sold his designer clothes, his watches, and his pride. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that the former golden boy of the Vance family is currently working 50 hours a week at a commercial car wash, desperately trying to pay off his debts on a minimum wage salary. I don't feel a shred of pity for him. I don't think about him at all. I walked out onto the wooden deck of my mountain cottage, breathing in the crisp, cold air. I looked down at the silver watch ticking steadily on my wrist. For 32 years, I was told I was a mistake. I was handed a DNA test as a cruel joke to prove I was nothing. But sitting here today, surrounded by the empire I earned and the legacy I reclaimed, I finally know the absolute truth. I was never the mistake. I was the masterpiece they were simply too blind to see. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far. You're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Family is not defined by who shares your blood, and your worth is certainly not defined by the people who failed to love you properly. You are allowed to set ironclad boundaries. You are allowed to walk away from toxic dynamics, even if they are disguised as family tradition. You are never anyone's mistake. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to cut ties to save yourself? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey.